A Muslim delegate gets up to support the resolution in Urdu. He says, Huzrat, I am a Muslim delegate. Immediately, some Hindu delegate gets up and calls for 3 cheers for all the Muslim delegates. And the response is so enthusiastic, just beyond words. Tatya, for this hilarious and momentary unity, the credit must go to Mr. Gandhi. The funniest part is he did not care for those Hindus who were opposed to joining the Muslims in the non-cooperation movement. But with regard to others, he told them that their attitude was unfortunate. To those Hindus who wanted to support on the condition that the Muslims give up cow slaughter, Mr. Gandhi asked them to shut up and not take up that question there in that setting.
I urge the audience to read these page numbers displayed on the screen in detail so they can know the truth, the whole truth.
I would like to also mention an absolute failure of the non-cooperation movement, so highly pushed by Mr. Gandhi, almost like his personal propaganda. When the Hindus were fearing to join the non-cooperation movement for the reasons that Muslims may invite the Afghans to invade Bharat, he had given a long speech stuffed with his own philosophy, and he had ended it with a statement saying, "No government can possibly withstand the bloodless opposition of a whole nation." But this hope did not come true because the Muslims themselves started getting impatient. And in their impatience, the Muslims did exactly what the Hindus feared they would do: invite the Afghans to invade Hindustan. To be honest, Tatya, how far the Khilafatists had proceeded in their negotiations with the Amir of Afghanistan is not possible to know, but such a project was entertained by them was beyond doubt. And it needs no saying that such a project of an invasion on Hindustan was the most dangerous project, and every sane Hindustani would dissociate himself from so mad a project. What part Mr. Gandhi played in the project it is not possible to discover, but he did not certainly dissociate himself from it is the fact that remains. On the contrary, ironically, Mr. Gandhi's misguided zeal for Swaraj and his obsession on Hindu-Muslim unity as the only means of achieving it led him to support it. I am really intrigued, Tatya, that can any sane man go so far for the sake of Hindu-Muslim unity? The irony is he never stopped to ask himself what he was really doing in the madness. In an article in Young India of 8th September 1920, Mr. Gandhi had suggested Hindus to shout Allahu Akbar as the first national cry, and then requested Muslims to shout Vande Mataram instead of Bharat Mata Ki Jai as the second national cry, and Hindu Muslim Ki Jai as the last national cry. This was the order of Mr. Gandhi's so-called national cries. He had claimed in that article that Hindustan can be nothing without the union of Hindu and Muslim heart. See, Tatya, Mr. Gandhi always went all out of his way to emphasize on to the Hindus to be tolerant towards Muslims through all his speeches, articles. But he had never called the Muslims to account even when they were guilty of gross crimes against the Hindus. What was never understandable was the attitude of Mr. Gandhi. He always made sure that he condemned any and every act of violence and also forced the Congress, much against its will, to condemn it. But to my wonderment, Tatya, he never protested against murders committed by the Muslims, neither did he ever call upon the leading Muslims to condemn such acts by their own Muslims. He always kept silent over them. This weird and unexplainable attitude of Mr. Gandhi could be attributed only to his extreme obsession of preserving Hindu-Muslim unity. So much so that he did not mind the murders of a few Hindus if it could be achieved by sacrificing their lives. Take the case of Mopla riots in the South Bharat. The blood-curdling atrocities committed by the Moplas in Malabar against the Hindus were indescribable. There was a wave of horrified feeling amongst the Hindus. But Tatya, Mr. Gandhi was so much obsessed by the necessity of establishing Hindu-Muslim unity that he ignored the doings of the Moplas and the Khilafatists who were congratulating them. Mr. Gandhi spoke of the Moplas as the brave God-fearing Moplas who were fighting for what they consider as religion and in a manner in which they considered as religious. Mr. Gandhi asked the Hindus to have courage and faith to feel that they could protect their religions in spite of such fanatical eruption. Tatya, does this even make sense to you or to anyone? Unfortunately, even the resolution passed by the Working Committee of the Congress on the Mopla atrocities clearly showed how careful Congress was to not to hurt the feelings of the Muslims. I urge everyone from the audiences to read the related pages in detail in my book. While in January 1922 in the Central Legislature, Sir William Vincent mentioned clearly that the forcible conversions by the Moplas ran into thousands, the Congress Working Committee claimed that only 3 such incidences were recorded. The instances of the silence of Mr. Gandhi over the cases of Muslim refusals to agree to anything had been recorded by Swami Shraddhanand in his weekly journal. In those times, Muslims and Christians were on a conversion spree, especially conversions of the Hindu untouchables. Mr. Gandhi had come up with a dictum saying the non-Hindus had nothing to do with it, but the Muslims and Christians had openly revolted against this dictum. But Mr. Gandhi said nothing by way of opposing such an act by the Muslims and Christians. In the history of Mr. Gandhi's efforts to bring about Hindu-Muslim unity, there are 2 incidents which are worth mentioning. The first one is when he had gone on a fast for 21 days in 1924. His fast produced unity conferences, but these conferences did not produce anything except pious resolutions which were broken the moment they were announced. The second incident was at the time of voting for or against the separate electorates at the Round Table Conference. When the communal award gave away separate electorates to the Muslims, Mr. Gandhi and the Congress opposed to it. But when it came to voting at the Round Table Conference, Mr. Gandhi and the Congress neither opposed it nor approved it. Isn't this attitude strange, Tatya?
Baba, you have mentioned in detail in your book about the communal riots that happened between 1920 and 1940 across the nation involving Hindus and Muslims. What do you think, Baba? Could those be avoided or stopped?
My answer to your question would be in one line. Those communal riots, which were the worst that Bharat had ever experienced, could never have occurred but thanks to the provocative conduct of the adherents of the Congress. To know everything in detail, our audience can read the book.
You mean to say Congress could have played an important role in the avoiding or stopping the riots, yet you are blaming the people of Bharat? Why so?
See, under the leadership of Mr. Gandhi, the Hindu society had certainly become mad after politics, if not a political madhouse. I will go slightly behind in time. The Hindu society was not in a state of efficiency, and it was engulfed in the mischief of evil customs which needed to be eradicated. Due to this, the birth of National Congress was accompanied by the foundation of Social Conference. While Congress was interested in defining the weak points in the political organization of the country, Social Conference had its focus on weak points in the social organization of the Hindu society. For some time, the Congress and the Conference worked as 2 wings of one common activity. They soon developed into 2 parties, a political reform party and a social reform party, raised a fierce controversy, and they became 2 hostile camps. There was a battle of thoughts. The Congress never believed that social reform was as important as political reform. The Congress was so eager to possess political power that they became impatient even of the propaganda in favor of social reforms. As I had said earlier, under the leadership of Mr. Gandhi, the Hindu society had become mad for politics. Finally, the Social Reform Party, led by Ranade and Gokhale, died, leaving the entire playfield open for the Congress. By then, another party amongst the Hindus had grown up, your own Hindu Mahasabha. But your party's rivalry with the Congress had nothing to do with the issue of social reforms versus political reforms. Its quarrel with Congress had its origin in the pro-Muslim policy of Congress. Hindu Mahasabha was concerned with the protection of Hindu rights against the Muslim encroachment. In 1923, Mr. Muhammad Ali, the then president of the Congress, in his address to the party, went much beyond the position taken by the Muslims in 1909. He said in his address, "It is the question of the suppressed classes if Hindu society does not speedily absorb them. The Christian missionary is already busy in converting them and no one quarrels with them." Tatya, this is extremely important. Remind me if I forget. This has a deep connect with my whole purpose of agreeing to come to your studio. So, coming back to what I was saying. Now I would like to highlight upon something which has not yet come in our discussion. In the year 1938, a controversy went on between Mr. Jinnah and the Congress. Mr. Jinnah was asked to disclose his demands, which he refused to do. But these demands surfaced in the correspondence that happened between Pandit Nehru and Mr. Jinnah. And those demands had been tabulated by Pandit Nehru in one of his letters to Mr. Jinnah. There were 14 demands made by Mr. Jinnah. But even after this new list, it was unknown where the Muslims would stop in their demands. Within 1 year, Muslims came up with one more substantial demand, which was of 50% share in everything. Through this and much more, like the Muslims wanted Urdu to be the national language of Bharat, it was very much evident that the Muslims not only were seeking to reduce the Hindu majority to a minority, but they were also cutting into the political rights of other minorities. The most unfortunate part of this whole story is, Tatya, your simple-minded Hindu Mahasabha patriots believed that the Hindus had only to make up their minds to swipe Muslims. But on the other hand, there were the Congress Hindu nationalists whose policy was to tolerate and appease Muslims by political and other concessions because they believed that they could not reach their cherished goal of independence unless the Muslims backed their demand. In my opinion, the Congress had failed to realize two things. Firstly, there was a difference between appeasement and settlement. Appeasement meant to offer to buy off the aggressor, that is the Muslims, by collaborating with him in the rape, murder and arson on innocent Hindus who happened to be the victims of the Muslims' displeasure. And settlement meant laying down the bounds which neither party to it could transgress. In short, appeasement had no limits, whereas settlement had. The second thing which Congress failed to realize was that the policy of concessions had increased the aggression of the Muslims, and the worst part was that the Muslims interpreted these concessions as defeatism on the part of the Hindus. In 1925, in a meeting held in Lahore, Dr. Saifuddin Kichlu of the Khilafat Committee said that if we remove British rule from this country and establish Swaraj, and if the Afghans or other Muslims invade Hindustan, we Muslims will oppose them and sacrifice all our sons in order to save the country from the invasion. But one thing I will declare plainly. Listen, my dear Hindu brothers. Listen very attentively. If you put obstacles in the path of our Tanzim movement and do not give us our rights, we shall make common cause with Afghanistan or some other Muslim power and establish our rule in this country. I hope, Tatya, our audience is aware that one of the primary tasks of Tanzim movement was and is convergence. Even people like Mrs. Annie Besant have also mentioned in their articles and writings that she has heard Muslim leaders declare that if the Afghans invaded Hindustan, they would join their fellow believers and would slay the Hindus. She has further said in her article that since the Khilafat agitation, due to the encouragement of the Khilafat crusade, the inner Muslim feeling of hatred against non-believers has sprung up naked and unashamed.
As you speak, Baba, with every word, my anger is getting converted into wonderment. About Congress, Mr. Gandhi, their stand, attitude, everything.
See, Tatya, I will present you with one more instance, which will only add to your current feeling. A resolution was passed in Congress session which read, "The object of the Indian National Congress is the attainment of Swaraj or complete independence, free from all foreign control by the people of India by all legitimate and peaceful means." Do you know, Mr. Gandhi had opposed this resolution? Basically, it has been the bloodline of Congress to turn back from its own words and statements. The Congress, which had passed a resolution of total independence, passed the resolution in favor of the dominion status. The reasons were many, but most important one being the internal feuds within the party. The reason for feuds? Domination of Mr. Gandhi and his unexplainable attitude and approach. The travel happened in this way. From total independence to substance of independence, from substance of independence to equal partnership, from equal partnership it was brought back to its original position. In the Nehru report, it has been clearly written that dominion status was the sole ultimate aim of the Mahatma.
Whatever you spoke till now, Baba, it is so engaging. I think the new generation of our nation must read your book.
Yes, it will at least offer them some points of views, hopefully.
Baba, you had asked me to remind you something.
I know. I just wanted to make sure that you remember it. I anyways remember what I had told you. It was regarding the Christian missionaries being busy then in those days of pre-independence, Tatya. The current scenario in our Bharat motherland even today is of deep concern to me. But to get to the topic, I would urge our audiences to read my speech. My last speech, which I had delivered in the 4th conference of the World Fellowship of Buddhists. My topic was Buddhism and Communism. Once you read that speech, which is available on the internet on the earth, that will be the backdrop of our next topic, Tatya. I hope you don't mind.
No, of course not. So, my dear listeners, read that speech and meet us in the next episode of our podcast, Tatyaba. Till then, Namaskar, Vande Mataram.